You should know by now that I do what I want. And with or without your approval, I was gonna spin her damn head around like the exorcist. She let my name fall out of her cocksuckers. I'ma put her in an obituary. This is Bedtime Stories. Grown-up edition. Poetic Justice. Part 8. When we left off, Nadia had revealed just how Stanley found out that Manny was his father and how he used that to his advantage. Angela had shared that in addition to Stanley's habit of paying for or taking the virtue of women, it had been a long-held belief that he was gay. And those were the secrets that the International Trafficking Organization had used to employ his assistance with taking down Q and everyone associated with him. At that same time, Waz found out precisely why Salima had smirked when he told her who Hanifa's people back in New York City were. He'd walked into the safe house and right into Taryn Cato, the Jamaican crime boss, making some rather inappropriate comments to his pregnant wife. And after getting the cliff notes on Salima and Taryn's past, he made it clear that Salima needed to make it clear to Taryn that the past needed to stay in the past. When they re-entered the room, Salima said, "Taryn, now that we've gotten all of the pleasantries out of the way, I want to make sure that you understand. I am not the girl you met a decade ago. When you thought my name was Talia, you were struggling to feed your family, and your daughter was running around the state of New York like a chicken with her head cut off. I told you back then it was in the game. And I get that that was hard for you to believe. But hear me and hear me well when I tell you that if you want to continue to be able to feed your family, you need to do two things. You need to watch your mouth, and you need to handle your daughter. As much as I appreciate you giving me the go-ahead to handle this little situation the way I saw fit, you should know by now that I do what I want. And with or without your approval, I was going to spin her damn head around like the exorcist. To help her save face, I will give her that seeing me step out of that car probably blew her damn mind. And that's why she wasn't prepared for that behind whooping. Because she didn't even get a swing off. And she could tell herself whatever story she needs to feel better about getting her behind whooped. But you better get some understanding with her. I don't do rematches. And if she let my name fall out of her cocksuckers, dial my husband's phone number, or speak Amira's name to the cops again, I'm not going to put hands on her. I'm going to put her in an obituary. Make sure she knows that I'm the reason why she eats. And please impress upon her that I don't do second chances." Taryn said, "I always knew that you were a force to be reckoned with. And now I see. You really her." Then he looked at Wise and said, "You're a lucky man. If she feels as good as she tastes." Salima didn't even let him finish. She said, "You think that's cute? You must not realize that your daughter isn't the only one in danger, nigga. I won't just stop you from eating, I'll stop you from breathing. It's obvious that your daughter gets disrespect, honest. I don't care how they give it up in Jamaica. Where I'm from, a nigga will lose his head for saying half of the things that you said to me today. I let it go because I have a meeting I need to get back to. But failing to respect my husband is dangerous. And making me repeat myself is even more dangerous. Do you want to live, Taryn?" Taryn said, "Whoa, Salima. I was just trying to make light of an uncomfortable situation and ruffle Wisdom's feathers a little bit. Like you and I. He and I have history. It looks like maybe prison or being married to a boss chick has simmered him down considerably. Because the Wisdom I used to know would have been ready to..." When Wise went to take a step towards Taryn, Salima put her arm out and said, "I got it, Daddy." Then she looked at Taryn and said, "The same way that I'm not the woman you used to know, he is not the man you used to know either. He doesn't pop off as readily as he once did, because he has to keep me from popping off. He doesn't have to spend his days competing with little niggas and corner boys, trying to keep his woman out of other niggas' beds, worrying about his woman, putting him in situations that might wind him up in prison. Now, he can spend his days doing what he loves, making love to the woman that he loves, preparing for the birth of his first child. He does not need to beat his chest or your behind to defend my honor or his manhood. Because the way he keeps a smile on my face, my belly and my bank account full, and the way he have me speaking in tongues when he put that D game down, he ain't got nothing to prove. But I guarantee he can pull his before you pull yours. And unlike you and your daughter, he got a rider. They got a shovel and an alibi, and it'll be his co-D if ever he needs it. When I was younger, I thought it was cute to see a man fighting for me. But I'm a big girl now, so I know just how important it is to have a man that I know can and will. And I also know how important it is to be the kind of woman who doesn't put him in situations where he needs to. I'll make you my first official offense and eat the charge before I let him do a day in a cell over you. Wise just smirked, and Terrence said, your position is clear and I overstand. I've been doing square business with your family for a decade. Wisdom, accept my apologies and my explanation. When I knew Salima as Talia, I thought I had found forever. Imagine my surprise and embarrassment when I learned that I was a job. I can't say that I ever truly got over that. It was petty of me to say the things that I said, especially to say them in your hearing. Neither I nor my daughter will be a problem for you or your wife ever again. Then he looked at Salima and said, give your father my regards. Then Salima looked at Stax, who was standing in for True, and said, show him to his daughter. Then she looked at Taryn and said, travel safe. Then Wise looked at Salima and said, you might need to let that driver know that you're going to need about 15 or 20 minutes. I need to holler at you right quick. Salima cozied up to Wise and said, let me find out you want to hear me speak in tongues. And Wise said, you know that gangster-ish turns me on. They dipped off into one of the bedrooms of the safe house. And before Wise made Salima speak in tongues, Salima reminded her husband that she ain't had no gag reflex. Meanwhile, at the round table, Nadia had just finished running through in her mind all of the things that her son had said and done and not said or done throughout his lifetime that confirmed all that Angela had said. She'd obviously known that her son was emotionally unbalanced, and she'd known that he'd been unlucky in love with the ladies. But it had never occurred to her that he was playing for the pink team. She didn't have a whole lot of experience with the Libiquita community. So in her mind, gay men were effeminate, and Stanley was not. And they certainly didn't work as hard as he did to try to curry favor with women. She also thought back over all of the things that she and Anand had said in Stanley's hearing, and realized that neither her or her husband had been even remotely as tolerant or as open as Andy had taught his children to be. She didn't consider herself phobic, but she was certainly ill-equipped. She had not created an environment where her son would have felt comfortable coming to her with such matters. If the assumptions about his sexuality were true, all things being equal, that meant that Stanley never had an outlet, a support system, or a welcoming environment where he could be his true self. And that had to have contributed to some of the choices that he'd made. And that thought gave her an argument. She signed, hear me out. Let me talk to my son. Give him a chance to come clean. If he confesses all, if he can point you to the mastermind, will you all at least consider letting him live? She looked at Manny and said, will you be open to talking with him and getting to know him as your son? Manny said, I'm open to talking to him and getting to know him as my son. But I'm also open to dealing with him like I would any other person who makes themselves an enemy of the five families. My vote won't be dependent upon his orientation. He didn't just jeopardize the reputation of the Charles family, and he didn't just endanger the lives of Q, Wood, Bella, Catherine, Saint, and True. His decisions endangered my niece, Melissa, and caused the lives of several of my men. Anyone else who did that would be dead already. He's only still alive because he has information that we need. And I will not pull rank because he's my son. The Queen Mother said, I love Stanley. I love you and Anand. Then she looked at Idra and didn't say anything. She said, but I don't care what he says. I don't care why he did what he did. He's a dead man. Idra said, he may not have felt like he could come to you and Anand, but Stanley has been my shadow his whole life. His orientation is not in question, as far as I'm concerned. I saw the writing on the wall a long time ago. I gave him countless opportunities to tell me himself. I had no clue that he was violating women, though. And I know for a fact that both I and Anand talked to him ad nauseum about how he treated women, how he talked about them, how he saw them. And clearly it had no impact on what he did when nobody was watching. I want to know everything that he used my organization to do, every way in which he misused his authority, every person that he manipulated, and everything that he got them to do on his behalf. And when all of the evidence is gathered, my vote is going to be the same as it was before you entered this room. Before I learned that he was Manny's son, my only hope is that we can have a funeral and his body will be there. I suggest that you prepare yourself because there are only 2 other voting members. And while I know that Q has a heart and he also loves Stanley, your son pulled a firearm and pointed it at his wife. And it was his daughter whose dorm room was invaded by 2 men with nefarious intentions. And Wood is Alejandro's cousin. We've had to stop him more than once today from exacting his own revenge. When I leave here today, the 5 families will be 1 family short again. You should expect that our family will be 1 member short too. Nadia signed, please, just show me to my son. Then she and Manny stood up and left the room. In the hallway, Marisol was waiting. She said, Manny, you and I need to talk. Meanwhile, at Donovan and Maribel's house, Donovan was preparing for his visit to the psychiatric treatment facility. After his initial sermon, the therapist that he'd seen while he was in residential treatment invited him to come back to the facility and speak with the patients there. Donovan had invited his therapist to attend the initial sermon, and the therapist had asked if he could stream the sermon into the facility for anyone who might be interested in watching it. Since the sermon was being streamed to the church's website, Donovan didn't see any reason why it shouldn't be, and he wasn't in a position to protest. Summarily impressed by Donovan's performance, the therapist had said, Donovan, there are several people currently in treatment who were there when you were, and hearing your impassioned sermon had to have done them some good just now. But I think that it would really help if you came back and gave back, poured into them in person. I'd like to speak with the administration about having you to come in and do a little talk or Q&A, kind of like the ones that we offered when you were a patient. If he agrees, would you be open to that? Donovan said, sure. I don't know how much it would help because when I was a patient there, I remember signing up to attend those little talks just to break up the monotony. I wasn't at all interested, and they ended up being boring as hell. The therapist laughed and said, I'm sure they were, but unlike those presenters, you have firsthand experience being a patient with us. You also have firsthand experience with battling mental illness, surviving the trials and tribulations that come along with it, and succeeding. And I think more than anything else, that's what our patients need to see. And if you help just 1 person, it'll be worth it. Donovan said, now that I agree with. And I have to agree with you. The people that y'all brought in when I was there had no clue what it was even like to be us. They may have had the knowledge, the education. They didn't have any real world experience. Maybe if they did, they wouldn't have been saying stupid stuff like mind over matter and talking about low vibrational activities. And hell, had they had any experience with Christ, they may have realized that mental illness is as much spiritual as it is biological. Then he quoted 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 that says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Donovan said, has anybody, ever suggested before Pastor Corey that when I had thoughts that weren't reflective of God's nature, I needed to question whether those thoughts align with God's truth, reframe them, redirect them, and refocus them so that they were in alignment with God's perspective in accordance with his word. The therapist said, I'd have to agree with you, which is even more reason why I think you are the perfect person to come back and speak to our patient. Now, unless you think that it might not be the best thing for you to do, maybe it's too much for you to handle, or Donovan said, nah, I'm Gucci. Put me in the game, coach. The therapist chuckled and said, I'll keep you posted. So at his and Maribel's house, Donovan was preparing to go and speak to the current patients at the inpatient treatment facility, where he and Porsha were both previously patients. He was looking forward to sharing the gospel of Christ, his own experience with salvation, freedom from the chains of mental illness, and some of the spiritual tools that he employed whenever the darkness of bipolar disorder and paranoia tried to creep back in. He was not foolish enough to think that somehow being born again meant that he would no longer have to deal with life's ills. If salvation didn't cure diabetes, hypertension, or glaucoma, he had no reason to expect or to tout it as a cure for any mental illness. While he did not limit God's ability to cure, redeem, and set free, he was a brand new believer in the adage that people who suffered from mental illness needed to get Jesus and a therapist, in that order. And if necessary, they needed medication too. And therapy and medication were not a substitute for a relationship with Christ, just like a relationship with Christ was not a substitute for comprehensive and necessary medical care. He'd heard countless stories of miraculous cures that could only have come about because God so willed them. Heck, I'd shared my own personal testimony with him. But believing God for a cure does not require the ill to discontinue medical treatment, healthy habits, and the real lifestyle changes required during the time between diagnosis and the cure. And that was in alignment with the message that Donovan planned to deliver the following day. When Maribel entered the study, she saw her man hard at work, looking comfortable and confident in his calling, and her heart was full. When she and Donovan met, she had no way to know what God had planned for him, for her, or for them. But somehow she knew that there was greatness inside him, and she was just glad that she was there to be a witness to Donovan walking into fulfillment of that promise. And she attempted to quietly back out of the room. Donovan saw her and said, "Where you going, sunshine?" Maribel said, "I didn't mean to interrupt. Do your thing." Donovan said, "You didn't. I was at a good stopping point. I was just practicing." Maribel said, "I just came to check on you and see how you were doing after Wood's memorial service today." Donovan said, "I'm surprisingly good. I really didn't expect to be, but for some reason, I have this overwhelming sense of peace. I feel like God's will is being done somehow in all of this. He's going to get the glory." I was nervous about telling Aunt Charlotte that, but when I did, she just smiled. On the surface, it was clear that she was grieving, but when I touched her and I talked to her, I felt that same peace radiating off of her. It was almost like she knew something that none of us did. Does that make any sense to you? Maribel said, "Not really, but I trust you and I trust the God in you." Donovan said, "Other than telling me you love me, that is the most affirming and supportive thing you have ever said to me. And I appreciate that." Maribel said, "Really? Wow." Donovan said, "I don't think God would be too upset with me if I put these papers down and put this D on you. The stuff I want to do to you right now is so nasty that all I can think about is that scripture that says that the marriage bed is undefiled." Maribel said, "Well, can we at least go to the marriage bed? Because you got a Bible, Strong's Concordance, and all of your other religious texts, study materials, and paperwork for your ministerial tests all over that desk. Not to mention, you're listening to gospel. And I don't know if I want to get booty butt naked in here." Donovan said, "I'll knock all this stuff over. But out of respect for my Lord and Savior, I'll race you to the bedroom. Last one there got to do a strip tease." And Maribel took off running. Despite the fact that she had a running head start, Donovan managed to get there first. He almost knocked her over because he wanted to see the Puerto Rican princess put on a show like only she could. And she did. Meanwhile, over at the round table, Angela looked at the Queen Mother, then she looked at Idra, and then she said, "I think the two of you need to talk. I'll step out." And in unison, the Queen Mother and Idra both said, "No, we don't." Angela chuckled and said, "Yeah, y'all do," and walked out of the room. While she was excusing herself, Manny and Nadia had run into Marisol on their way to have what would probably be their last conversation with their son Stanley. They also ran into Q, returning from bringing Wise a lawyer at the police station and dropping him off at the safe house. He'd heard Marisol ask Manny if she could speak with him, and he'd said, "Manny, real quick, I need a favor." So when Angela came out in the hall, it was empty, all except for Q. And he said, "So you the queen pin, huh?" And Angela said, "Not exactly. I guess I have some explaining to do, huh?" Q said, "Yeah. Step with me into my office real quick." And then he pulled Angela into an adjoining room. Before she could say a word, he covered her mouth with his. And when the two separated, she said, "The cameras." Q said, "I had Manny shut those off. You can explain whatever you need to explain when we get home. Right now, I need some of that queen pin. You put your boss down in there. And as much as I don't want either of us in this life, giving it up like that brought a whole new element to the game. I like how you move, Miss Lopez." Angela said, "Home?" Q said, "Rock with it. You playing head of the Lopez family. Figure we could role play. I think we need to do some negotiating. How about you?" Then Q lifted his very pregnant wife up off the floor and sat her on the table. At the same time, over at the safe house, Wise had his pregnant wife on her back with her skirt up and her legs over her head. And in their marital suite, Maribel had just wrapped up her striptease for her husband. She'd thrown her last piece of clothing at him, her panties, and he caught them with his mouth. Over at the safe house, Selima was loud enough to wake the dead. It was a good thing that her and Wise were on the top level of the house, and the rest of the house was pretty much cleared out, with the exception of the necessary soldiers to keep them safe. Wise was asking Selima, "Where am I?" And Selima was saying, "Home." Over at the round table, Angela was using Q's suit jacket to muffle her moans, as her husband was turning her nether regions into a tsunami and saying, tastes like honey. And over at Maribel and Donovan's, Maribel was a 6 and Donovan was a 9, or Maribel was a 9 and Donovan was a 6. I don't know. Whatever number they were competing to see who could bring whom to their final conclusion first. And Donovan won, because he started humming the words to August Alsina's Ready, right into Maribel's mic.
We can get it in right now, even over there right now. Pull up pennies over to the side, let a young nigga find his stride.